Earlier this week I recorded the first Irish Identitarian podcast episode and took my sweet time editing it. In the meantime, and fairly quickly, Charlie Flanagan called off his despicable commemoration of the Royal Irish Constabulary, and in turn, the Black-and-Tans. The link to that podcast can be found in the description, as well as any other information I mention, including TheJournal.ie Article, which serves as the most comprehensive coverage of the event's cancellation. If you're unfamiliar with this event, it seems to have only come to public attention last week that Minister for Justice Charlie Flanagan and, presumably, Garda Commissioner Drew MI5 Harris had launched a pet project slated for January 17th, in which the most oppressive famine-era British military police will be commemorated. Everyone else seemed to know better and distance themselves from it, including even Leo Varadkar and Micheál Martin. But none of our national-level politicians actually stood up to this insanity. Micheál Martin said it was an error in judgment, while Sinn Féin's Mary Lou MacDonald said it should be cancelled. These are three select words taken from both of their statements, but to the Journal's credit, it demonstrates how non-committal they were about the entire thing. This whole situation is a gift to the Irish people if they were to read in between the lines, as it's the most solid example of what our politicians think of our country and our people. First example, as I mentioned above, is how everyone distanced themselves from this situation without actually going to battle for us. The second example is RT's Sunday night panel debate on whether or not the commemoration should go ahead. I only found out about this segment thanks to an upload by Big Taboo, Ireland's leading YouTube channel for uploading clips from Irish media dealing in questions of immigration, national character, and other taboo subjects. I didn't press play on that video, however, as the very idea of this being discussed at all on the state broadcaster made me sick. There should be only one response to such an insult, and that's to call it out for what it is. A fitting analogy would be if a member of the German, Austrian, or Israeli government were to propose a commemoration for the Nazi guards who died of starvation and typhus in Auschwitz. After all, they were just serving their country, defending their way of life, and taking orders, right? Anyone alive today would reasonably expect the establishment left and right of Israel to unite in condemnation of the very idea, and if there is any mention of it on Israeli state television, it would be a rabid condemnation. So why not in Ireland? If the 50,000-strong petition against the commemoration event and the Wolf Tones rendition of "Come Out You Black-and-Tans" soaring to number 1 on iTunes is anything to go by, RTE would come out in condemnation of the event if it was run by actual Irish people. The third example is who was attending the event. Minister for Justice Charlie Flanagan, the man leading the department in charge of the second great plantation of this country, and who runs the inhumane detention camps we call direct provision centres. The second starring guest is Garda Commissioner Drew Harris, whom I call Drew MI5 Harris, because we can't forget his position in Britain's internal intelligence agency, the same agency that infiltrated the Republican and civil rights movements, planted bombs on behalf of the IRA in their own country, assassinated innocent people, and to this day hides documents detailing such crimes. Mr. Harris's father was killed by the IRA, and it's clear that he still has an axe to grind with us, as his first statement after becoming commissioner was to declare that the biggest threat to Ireland is Irish republicanism. Not crime, not unlimited immigration, not banks evicting tens of thousands of people. None of that. Just this vague spectre called Irish republicanism. Or at least it was a vague spectre until he came into the office in September of 2018, when days later a squad of balaclava, armed, unidentifiable Gardaí aided a private security firm in the eviction of some hippies who were squatting in a Dublin townhouse. That really rattled the cages of the slumbering Irish, with some calling for an armed insurrection on social media, reflecting what many of us were feeling as we followed the live reporting of the event. Much like in December of that year, when Gardaí stood by during an eviction in Roscommon while an elderly ex-Garda had the crap beat out of him by private thugs. It seems as though Mr. MI5 is creating the enemy he has warned us about. I wonder why. It couldn't be deliberate, surely. I, for one, wholeheartedly believe Drew Harris is the first person on Earth whom a national intelligence organization simply let retire. The fourth example is how Charlie Flanagan responded to the cancellation. Mr. MI5 couldn't give his input because he's now a Garda and that would be against the law. But Flanagan responded like a bureaucratic robot. An offended robot. He's quoted in TheJournal.ie Article as saying, "Given the disappointing response of some to the planned event on 17 January, I do not believe that the event, as planned, can now take place in an atmosphere that meets the goals and guiding principles of the overall commemorative program. If I may employ another analogy, imagine a state in the USA planned a year of commemorative events, and a local representative in a majority white and deeply racist town decided to plan an event to commemorate the loss of African American lives in a local slave revolt, or maybe African American members of the civil rights movement. Protests arose, angry letters were written, and somebody sprayed a swastika on a black church. Of course, that wouldn't happen in 2019, but just go with it. Charlie Flanagan's statement would have fit better in this context. It's what you say when someone's being unreasonable and spoiling the fun for everyone else. It's not him who is being unreasonable. It's not him who needs to apologize. It's us, the people. He then went on to say, #NotAllRIC, that there were many fine people who served in the Royal Irish Constabulary and Dublin Metropolitan Police. I'll address this issue in a second, but first, what got me scratching my head was the statement, "Thousands of Irish people have ancestors who served in the Dublin Metropolitan Police and Royal Irish Constabulary. These personal histories are part of the history of our island. I believe it is right that we acknowledge that history." First of all, where did he get the thousands from? We're talking about early to mid 1800s here, not ancient history. These people didn't settle down and intermarry with native Irish and produce hundreds of offspring that resulted in thousands of descendants. Maybe I have my history wrong here and somebody can educate me on how thousands of us have ancestors who served in the RIC, but it seems as though Flanagan has a very loose grasp on history or is trying to slip one past us. Many of us instantly thought this whole venture was an attempt at historical revisionism, and perhaps this thousands of ancestors remark was one of the tactics. The thing we have to remember about Charlie Flanagan is that he's old blood. His father, Oliver J., was Minister of Defence in the 1970s, very much an Irish Illuminati family. They're from County Laois. Laois was in the westernmost part of the Pale, the section of Ireland directly controlled by Britain. It's where we get the phrase "beyond the Pale," meaning somewhere outside of the rule of law. While in the Pale, everyone spoke English and only English laws and customs were practiced, so people lived in relative peace. Beyond the Pale was a different story. The rest of the country spoke Irish and still practiced the old Breton laws to organise our society and settle our disputes. Flanagan's family didn't have any problems with the British police because they were cucks, already fully colonised. The rest of us, however, were subject to a wide spectrum of colonisation tactics. The creation of the black and tans were one such tactic, involving the demoralization and the divestment of our people through rape, murder, torture, harassment, and arson, sometimes the destruction of whole villages. To loan some verbiage from the social justice warriors, Flanagan is speaking from a privileged perspective. Sure, our government's capital is in Dublin, and that's where our sacred 1916 rising took place, but this faux pas by Flanagan should have us all asking ourselves, what does it mean to be Irish? Are most people in Laois, Dublin, Kildare, Waterford, etc. truly Irish? Perhaps most are, but what about the political dynasties and the landlords whose descendants still rule today? As a closing statement, I want to reiterate an idea I hinted towards earlier, that this whole thing is a psychological operation to radicalize Ireland. It's been a pet theory of mine for the last 2 years that certain elements within and outside the country want us to stage a revolution, either to bring our own country to its knees like the French have been doing for the past 13 months, or to actually accomplish a revolution. Many of the dipsticks I have in contemporary Ireland, including social media, family, friends, and random people I meet, the overall sentiment is a socialist sentiment. A well-meaning socialist sentiment, which is concerned with equalizing the playing field for everyone in the country, but one that's still vulnerable to Marxist infiltrators who may divert any revolution towards a communistic nightmare, much like what was done during the Russian Revolution at the turn of the last century. Since 2018, we've seen blatant corruption and insults to the spirit of our people that seem so obvious that they couldn't be accidents. We should consider the possibility that we're being lured into a trap. Addendum. Something I forgot to bring up was Flanagan's fetish for globalism. If you noticed, he said in a quote, "our island," as opposed to "our nation." This is because Flanagan sees Ireland as just a lump of land beside another lump of land, which in turn is beside a larger lump of land connected to other lumps of land. Elsewhere in the Journal article, he's quoted as saying he wants to bring the English and Irish together in reconciliation. One brief point I'll make about this: our people fought for equality in our own land, mainly under the banner of the IRA. To many English people, the IRA is a dirty word, and everyone involved with it are scum. And naturally so. We killed their countrymen. We blew up their pubs and hotels. This isn't going to change. So I have a deal to make with Flanagan. When I can personally go to England, somewhere outside of London, and host a commemoration event for the IRA men who lost their lives in the process of murdering English people, and not receive any angry letters, death threats, and face protests and petitions, then I would gladly participate in a commemoration of the Royal Irish Constabulary. But that's not going to happen, because frankly it shouldn't ever happen.